So, I guess we should start by introducing the guest first and foremost.
Yeah. So, a few weeks ago, you two happened to stumble across this Persona 1 fan site. It was mostly Flair that found it.
Yeah, I was
But,
just pulled along for a ride.
yeah, and we thought it was just the most fascinating thing ever. We made like an hour and a half long video about it.
And this caused it to kind of blow up. RPG site tweeted about it.
And,
And
through some great fortune, we managed to run across the legend herself. And I was pretty surprised to learn you're actually a woman. Like,
Yeah, it's yeah. There's a little bit of a complicated story in terms of like who is running the site and everything. But like, and I don't mean stepping on your toes here, but I don't know if you want me to just jump into this or not. But
yeah, that's fine.
it was hilarious to me because and we can talk about like the history of it, but just to me, like this site had been just sitting there for years and years and years, like with nothing about it going on. And, to the point of it just being kind of out of my mind. And so all of a sudden, like it just returns and it was been the weirdest thing in the world for me because just like I said, like it was just this quiet kind of thing just sitting there. And then all of a sudden, like people were talking about it and tweeting it. And I go on YouTube and there's an hour and 20-minute video and that freaks me out. So it's been hilarious, like this kind of whole situation. So
you say the ownership / management of the site is complicated. Can you?
Well, I guess complicated in the sense of like I think that there was a little bit of confusion as to who actually ran the site and everything. So I used to go by the name Shidoshi, so I was kind of like the main person who made it. Because I think at one point you guys gave credit to Henry Lapierre for being the one who ran it, but I was the main person, and then there was a few guys who kind of helped me out with like the FAQ I didn't do, and there's a few other things. But I was the main person to kind of start it and make it.
So I guess on that note, what was it that inspired you to make the site to begin with?
Well, so like not too long after high school, I had gotten a job at Game Fan magazine. And for people who were kind of into gaming back in the magazine days, it was one of the bigger American magazines out there. And the kind of thing that it had was that it was focused a lot on Japanese gaming and also import gaming. In part because it had actually started as an import video game shop, and then they made a catalog to kind of advertise their titles, and that catalog actually turned into the magazine. So I had kind of been into Japanese gaming and imports and stuff before that, and so I wanted to work for them, so I kind of sent a resume and submissions and everything. I got hired onto them. So when I went to Game Fan, the culture there was very Japanese gaming focused. There are a lot of people who were like super into Japanese gaming and everything. And then, so was I, to certain levels of knowledge that I had at that point. So we had the magazine division, but then we also had the strategy guide division. And the strategy guide division would make either official or unofficial strat guides for different games. And one day, one of the people on that team came to me and he said, we're going to be doing the strategy guide for an RPG that's going to be coming to America called Persona. And at that point, I knew a little bit about Megami Tensei. Like, I knew it existed, and I knew kind of some of the themes about the series, and that it was an Atlas series and things like that. But I wasn't like super... I had never played one of them at that point. And so I was interested, but I didn't have much knowledge. So I said, yeah, sure, I'd help out. And then when we were making the strategy guide, I ended up doing like some of the more like writing stuff. I wasn't doing the figure out how many hit points this demon has kind of stuff. It was more the writing side. So Atlas sends us basically a copy of the game. We're playing it, we're checking it out. And like as I'm playing it, it just feels... And this is so weird to say now, right? Because we all know Persona, we all know Megami Tensei and Shin Megami Tensei and everything. But it was so weird to play it because it felt so different. And it felt, I mean, and not to say that there weren't any RPGs that we had gotten that kind of were more like present day based. We had like Earthbound and maybe a couple other examples, but it just, there was something about it that stood out from like everything else I had played, and it kind of grabbed me at that point, and I ended up loving it. And I was in this really interesting position of having the English version of the game before it was out, and before kind of the majority of people were even going to know what Megami Tensei was. And in looking at the website and in the internet, there were no English language pages for the game at all, period. I think at that point there isn't even like an Atlas page or anything. And so, I looked like, okay, I have access to this game. We had really, really, for the time, really good capture devices that could just do straight RGB from consoles. So it's like I can get really good screenshots from the game. I can play it. I have it in English, which nobody else has. So I should just do a fan site. And, of course, because we had embargo for when the strategy guide would come out and when we could talk about the game, I couldn't do it like right at launch, but I ended up launching it in February of 1997. It went up early February for kind of like quote unquote beta testing. And from there, like things started building up on it.
Now, you say you had an early English copy. Did it have anything like different? It
has the full Snow Queen quest in it.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And
In English?
Well, no, partially in English though. There are parts of the quest that are in English, which is really interesting to me, and made me kind of think that it was something that they were trying to do, but just didn't end up having time to do. Because there were certain, and I don't know enough about how the localization for that game worked on a technical level, but I think there were some parts that were still in full Japanese, some parts that were in like kind of randomized characters, and then some parts that were actually in English. So it did exist, and I'm kind of curious. I think I might have checked, and that it might still be in the physical, the final retail release, but you obviously can't get to it because they cut off a certain step just in the coding. It has a full debug, which got interesting because I figured out that you could set it so that you could get Yuki back in your party after the point where she leaves, if you play the main game. And it did kind of break a few things, but you could put her back into your party and have her in there. And there was a few other kind of an interesting little things that, like, if you really dug into the debug, you could find some stuff. But so the main thing for me was that the Snow Queen quest was in there. It was, as far as I remember, fully playable. It was just the case that there was that one step, like that one point in the process that they turned off so that you couldn't actually get to it. But I guess the question I don't remember is like, if I were to use the debug to give you a save past that point in the Snow Queen quest, like, would it work on the retail copy? And that I honestly don't remember.
Yeah, it's hard. Do you still have that prototype by any chance?
Yeah, I still own it. It's I actually put it. I got like kind of a little bit of a one of the CD jewel cases that has more of the holders on it, and I put it in with the main copy of the game. So.
Have you ever considered maybe publishing that online or having some people
like
take
I
a
need to
look at
check
it?
and see like if it's out there, because I think a long time ago I did check and I can't remember if I found it or not, but I think it's one of those weird points where I'm actually still in game media and I still work directly with Atlas. So I don't know if there's any question of, if I put that out there, is there any kind of trouble I can get into? I'm not sure. But it is really interesting, and it is the kind of thing where I think if I could put it out there, it would be good just to have that piece of history and also let people kind of play around with the debug and stuff.
Were the characters like portraits and graphics changed in that version?
Yeah, I because everything I put on site came from that version. So like all the screenshots of like you guys are going through like this kind of school section and stuff, and so all that stuff came from the game itself. So the version that we got, because actually the version I have is from October, I believe, is an October build, and I think the game came out in December of that year of '96. So the version we had was pretty much near final. So it was like Mark had been changed, and like the hair colorings had been changed, and names were of course changed and stuff.
So you mentioned a second ago that you kind of learned about Megami Tensei from working on the magazine. Did you have it? How did you kind of get into the series as a whole after Persona 1?
So what's funny is I think you guys were talking about like on the site was my excitement for was a Devil Summoner.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, I wonder if it's coming out to America or not on Saturn, and it of course didn't.
Sadly.
So what happened from there was, funny enough, I gave up on Devil Summoner, but I then ended up really pushing for Soul Hackers, to the point where I actually made a separate website that was a petition site to try to get convince both Sony and Atlas together that we needed Soul Hackers in America.
Wow.
So I made this separate site that then went down, like it didn't stay up because it didn't have much of a purpose at that point, you know. But so it was that, and then I think it wasn't until Persona 2 that I really played another game, and I hated Persona 2 when it came out.
Wow.
Yeah, Eternal Punishment. And the problem was because like I'm the kind of person that sometimes if I end up really, really loving a game, that it's really hard for me to appreciate the next game, because if it's different in kind of any way, I'm disappointed. Like a perfect example of this was I hated Silent Hill 2 when I first played it, and Silent Hill 1 is one of my favorite games of all time. And I've come to now absolutely love Silent Hill 2, but it was a thing like it just had changed enough that it didn't feel to me like the thing I'd fallen in love with. And also, I think my expectations were too high. So when I went into Persona 2, I think again my expectations were too high, and I ended up really not liking the combat system at first because it just felt different enough that I wasn't kind of clicking with it. And so I ended up actually a few days later taking Persona 2 back to the store and returned it.
Oh, wow.
And then it wasn't until, I mean, I would say, I think maybe the PS2 era, when we started getting into the, you know, the Nocturnes and Digital Devil Saga and the Raito games and stuff like that, that I really got back into it. And that's kind of when my SMT fandom was really born. Is like, I loved Persona, but I loved Persona as this kind of singular thing that existed on its own until that point. And then once we were really getting other examples of those kind of games in America in English, like that's when I got more into them. And I finally got my Soul Hackers, finally.
Yeah, it took them long enough.
It took it took long enough, yeah. But
Worth the wait?
I actually really liked it. Yeah, it's you know what's funny for me is it's really hard for me to go back to a lot of RPGs in terms of like encounter rates, or I kind of hate random battles in terms of like not seeing them on the field and everything. And so there's a lot of like kind of more old school aspects to RPGs that make me not be able to go back. But for some reason, the Megami Tensei games, like I can go back always. Like I nothing about Soul Hackers felt too old or too rough to me. I really liked it. I can completely go back to Persona 1. I've been able to go back to Persona 2, you know, so this is kind of like one of the few series where I really feel like I can still appreciate those old games while also liking more modern era things as well.
So I have a couple questions here more related to the more technical side of the website.
Mm-hmm.
First off, how much experience do you have building websites before going into that, if any? Was it like...
I mean, this is gonna make me sound really, really old, but when I was in high school, it was at a point where most people didn't have internet connections. Like there weren't options, or you just didn't have one because nobody knew what this internet thing was for the most part. So I had actually found a way to sneak through. Our local college had a dial-up number so that students could dial up and then use the internet from there. And so I found a way to kind of sneak through that system to get online without being a college student. And I was making my first websites at that point. And this again, this makes me sound really old. This was before we had web browsers. So what it literally was like white text on a black background.
Wow.
And I used the built-in email client to make the HTML files. So I kind of like would capture like HTML from other websites and like look at the coding and see how they made them and make my own that way. So I was actually making websites before there was like color and graphics and things like that. And then once we got proper websites and web browsers and everything, then I was making a ton of like fan stuff. Like I going to like the waifu question, like I actually made like a kind of character shrine at one point for like video game characters and stuff, and made my own little like web news website and things like that. So I actually had a decent amount of web design experience, and then I also like GameFan. I was one of the people that was running our website. So
it blows my mind hearing character shrines again.
I know. It was so funny too because like I actually made one of the designs I made. This other site ended up ripping off, and then it became like super huge, but I can't remember like what it was called.
Do you remember what the character shrine was for?
Well, it was for different video game characters, but what it was on what I did was on each page at the top, I had like artwork of the character, and then I had kind of a speech bubble, so that the characters section you were looking at was kind of like introducing you to each section, like, you know, artwork or screenshots or concept art or, you know, not safe for work stuff or whatever it was. It's like the character would introduce you to it. So I know that like after I had made that site a couple years later, there was a much bigger site that used that same kind of like layout design. But so mine was I was really also big into SNK stuff. So it was like some of the SNK fighter characters, and then later on I added some like characters from other RPGs and stuff like that.
Nice. And the other half of this more technical question was, how is the website still up? Like, is somebody like paying for a web domain?
No, I know. Like, it's so funny because like you guys credit card draining from this or something, and
I think it was me who made the joke of something like, is this just draining off some dead person's credit card cut off?
It's like the most boring answer in the world, but it's just I pay for web hosting anyway, so I just put it back up.
Oh, all right.
Because I had taken it offline, so. And I think Fither, Nick, whichever one. I showed him a screenshot of a design I was working on, but in 1999 or so, I was actually working on a complete update to the Velvet Room that would have included Persona 2 as well. So I was working on like a total site redesign and everything. And then in 2000, I think it's because, and this sounds so silly, like I think I went through a really bad breakup in 2000, and so I think I kind of like lost a lot of passion for some of the things I was doing at that point. So in 2000, I basically just pulled every site I was running down, and so everything went away, including the Velvet Room. And this is why it's funny to me that all this happened, was years later, I was kind of going through some of my old web archive stuff, and I found the Velvet Room again, and I'm like, you know, there's like no hurt to it going back up. And like I honestly didn't think anybody was going to look at it, anybody was going to even find it, but it was like, just in case somebody does, then it'd be kind of neat to have it back up. So I just threw it on my web server, and it's been sitting there. So it doesn't cost me anything to have it up, just because I'm already paying for my own personal hosting for other projects anyway. So it's just kind of sitting there.
Yeah, like I'm super glad that you do have it up, because I think that kind of stuff is really, really important. As just
well,
like
kind of, you know, it's like I kind of appreciated it a little more when you guys were like talking, like looking through it and talking about it, because to me it was like, you know, this is just a silly old thing I made, and it's not that big of a deal. But like me going back through it through like you guys and other people who have looked at it now, it is actually kind of cool to get that. You know, what were opinions back then, like the Persona 2 survey, for example. You know, there's some really interesting, like, opinions in there and stuff, and, like, the character polls and things like that. Like, it's kind of this screenshot of Persona and Megami Tensei history that I think we kind of forget about now.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cultural, technological, like, time capsule in a way. I think that stuff is, like, super important because, like, preservation of digital stuff is so bad. Like, we have lost just so much different kinds of media. I don't know if you're really into like lost media kind of stuff, but I find that to be really, really interesting. Just the idea that we could lose something, which is why I'm like kind of into the idea of you getting that like Persona 1 prototype you have out there. Just because it's like you never know if that disc will just go missing, and if no other person on the planet has one.
Well, it's funny, like, because thinking about like the site I made, then somebody else, and I'm totally forgetting his name, and I feel bad about that, but somebody else then soon after made a different Megami Tensei fan site, and like kind of the top banner on the homepage that you guys were looking at, this is like I Love Atlas, like that was to his page. And so we were kind of
site.
Yeah, and so we were kind of like, two of the earliest websites out there for English fans, and thinking about like his site now being gone is sad, or the other kind of like early stuff, and like you're saying, is we don't realize how much we lose just because at that point it kind of feels disposable. Like a few years after Persona came out, like even like my site was like, is there really a place for this? Because there's part of you that thinks, well, we have game facts now, we have like YouTube videos, we have all these kind of different options for finding out some of that information. So is what I made still important? And I think, like I was just saying, is in going back and looking at my site again, I think the interesting part is some of the smaller things. Like the things that I didn't think about, versus like here's a Demon Fusion guide, right? Like that you don't need anymore per se, but there's a lot of the kind of smaller fan community aspects that can easily get lost over time, and so you lose that perspective of, what were people thinking when Persona was brand new.
Yeah, that's absolutely one of the things I think we found the most fascinating, is that like the more things change, the more things are kind of the same, because you look 20 years ago and like you can just like I remember there was the post about like all the different waifus and such, and it's like you can just superimpose the names of Persona 5 characters onto that, and it conveys literally the same meaning.
Were you
and I know it's kind of confusing by the way that it was written, but that me. So that was the funniest part for me, was I had completely forgotten that I wrote that and what I had written, and so in my like, so honest to God, like when I found out you guys did a video of this, I first saw it, it took me like a full day to watch it because I was so nervous about it.
Oh.
So I was like, I have no idea like what they're going to be saying, and like, so to me it was just an embarrassing website, and so I'm like, I can't watch this, and I finally did, and then it was going well until like the waifu section, but I mean it made me really laugh, but I had forgotten like little things like that. But in you guys going through it, as somebody who has stayed in the Persona fandom and later had those exact same arguments again with Persona 3 and Persona 4 and Persona 5, like it really is so funny that nothing has changed. And people think it's changed, and people think that Persona 3 brought this all in, but it didn't. Like that stuff was around forever.
It is eternal.
Do you think, like, this is kind of a weird question, but do you think that there's something just kind of about the internet that makes us act like that? Because 20 years ago, like, when the internet was really not that much available, more or less the same kind of philosophy was in place of like these little waifu wars.
I think it's just anything that kind of causes you to have emotional connection to characters. Like, I remember when Final Fantasy VI came out. I loved the character Celeste in that game, and not like necessarily like a waifu kind of way, but like I just like really liked her character. And I don't know if you guys are going to know anything about what I'm about to say, but
Did you feed the wrong fish?
No. There was a company called, I think, Digital Pictures or something. The people who made like the games like Night Trap and Double Switch and things like that. Like the kind of they were one of the companies who started the idea of games that were based around full motion video.
Yeah, like the Sega CD kind of stuff.
Yeah, Sega CD stuff, right? And so the guy, I think his name was Tom Zito, who ran the company, he was saying in this magazine article about the reason why FMV videos were going to be the future and why they were going to kill other kinds of gaming was because people could have a connection when seeing a real human being on screen that they couldn't seeing like a sprite or a piece of 2D artwork. And I remember writing this like scathing letter to him in this fanzine I was making about how a character like Celeste from Final Fantasy VI was far more important and far more of a real person than any of the characters that had appeared in his games and stuff like this, you know. It's like, even like in that era, even when we're talking about the tiny little 2D sprite on screen that the Final Fantasy VI characters were, like, I still had that emotional connection to them. And so I think part of it has just been that, you know, when you play a video game, because you're interacting with it and because you're sometimes controlling those very characters, that you tend to create more of a bond to them. And I think the moment you have any kind of bond to characters, it breaks down into, you know, why do I love this character and in what way? And which leads to, I want to be this person, I want to have sex with this person, you know, I want to marry this person, like whatever it is like, we find these bonds that we create with like all these video game characters just because they've been made in a way that they aren't just kind of like boring static people, you know. They have something about them that stands out because you have to do that in a video game, but then you do that and you connect any kind of story to it, and then we just naturally get drawn to, you know, putting ourselves neither in the shoes of the protagonist and how they would act, or just kind of creating an emotional bond, period, through controlling them or whatever it is. So I think the waifu stuff, along with everything else, has always existed. I mean, maybe not like Atari 2600 era existed, but past that, I mean, even just in the case of like the NES, for example, and the Super Master System, you know, even in that era, people had those kind of feelings and connections to characters.
So I guess getting into that, like, tell us some things about what the 90s internet was like, because I was only alive in the 90s for 3 years.
I've got one. Okay, half a year.
I mean, like, the you know, because you brought up, well, not you brought up, but when you were reading the page, one of the things you read news groups. And, like, I think it's really hard to understand news groups in this era, but back then, like, that was everything. Like when we talk about what the internet was in terms of gaming communities, it was news groups. And I can still tell you, you know, I was on rec.games.video.sega. Like, that was my main one. And you had these that seem so primitive and so archaic now, but it was this kind of this amazing thing where I love a game and somebody halfway across the world loves that game, and suddenly we can talk about that, you know. Like, I think in a weird way, a different connection would be like fighting games, is that I love fighting games, but back in older eras, if there was a particular game you loved, if you had no local friends who loved that game as well, you just didn't play it. Like, you had no outlet unless you were playing against the computer. You had no connection to that human experience of playing that fighting game with somebody else because there was no internet, there was no online play. It was either I know people in real life in my neighborhood who like this game, or I don't play it. And so it was kind of like a similar interesting connection, was that I can go online and I know this really obscure game, or I'm a huge fan of Phantasy Star and I want to talk to somebody else, and suddenly they're there, they exist. If you go to school and your friends at school, none of them know this game or care about this game, like, you suddenly had people out there who did care. And it was this kind of amazing connection of, I've finally found others that I can talk to about this that I haven't had a chance to talk to at all. And I mean, before that, there were these things called BBSs, for people who know that, which was the idea of like the internet, but more local. You know, actually, somebody in your hometown, they have a computer and you can call their computer and leave messages on it, and people can do that as well. So, you know, that kind of world existed, but it existed as a very local thing still. It was people in your city, you know, unless you had the ability to spend a lot of money to pay for like long distance and stuff. Like, it was still a very local. Suddenly, when the internet comes around and then news groups are there, then you can go on and you can see these people talking about games, and it felt like this club just suddenly existed that never existed before. You know, it was like this whole world opened up into being able to have these discussions about stuff. But you know what? It was the same as it is now. If people were yelling at each other and calling each other names and calling each other stupid and having big arguments and coming up with all these reasons why you were right and that stuff like that. But it was still exciting, and it was also a case where in those older days, it was much harder to get online, and it was not a common thing. So it was definitely kind of the hardcore of the hardcore, which was interesting, And that's not saying anything, bad about how things are today, but it was a very kind of hardcore space. As if you were on Rec Games Video Sega, you loved Sega consoles, you loved Sega games, you loved games that were on Sega consoles, and it was really passionate and really dedicated, even though it was still kind of very niche.
I've got another one for you.
Sure.
When it comes to the Megami Tensei series, it's from what you've said, you've got really into the PlayStation 2 era. Now, was there anything from, and this is more just Megami Tensei in general, any games that you'd consider underrated or unloved by the more modern branch of the community?
I mean, I don't know that there is, like, in that era, right? And I'm gonna admit here, I've never played Nocturne, and I know it's a huge oversight on my part. But that's still like one of the games from the era that I missed out on. I might say the Rideout games, the kind of, because when it got to this weird third-person Resident Evil-ish kind of action adventure, like, I know when those came out, they were kind of mixed opinions, and I think those were really, really neat games that were obviously very, very different from what we expected, but they were kind of a fun different. I don't know, like, if I'd say Mach and X was one, because that was really, really unusual, and I think, like, even I appreciate it as much as I should have it at the time.
Dreamcast, correct?
Yeah, Dreamcast. And then I think there was a PS2 port later, I think, for that. I mean, like, I know it's the wrong answer because it's not what you're thinking, but I mean, I think far and away Persona, the original, is the most underrated of all the games at this point. But I think the Rideout games would be the one my choice for that, because I know, especially at that time, like, I don't know how they are now, to be honest. I don't know kind of the feeling on those games specifically, but at the time it was very mixed, and it was kind of like when you get to Persona 3, and you have the argument of, is this real Megami Tensei or not? Like,
right,
that,
the generation divide.
Yeah, that argument happened in a smaller scale with the Rideout stuff, because it was, well, it is Megami Tensei still, but it plays wrong, and it's too actiony and it's too adventure-y kind of stuff. So that would probably be my choice.
For what it's worth, I was very happy with those two answers.
Like, the Rideout games are great. I mean, like, I can't remember which one I liked better, because there was one that was better than the other one, but like, I kind of miss that risk-taking that I feel like we had more of in the PS2 era. When it's like, we can just do something weird and maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll work
out, maybe it won't, but we tried something different and unique.
Yeah, and that's kind of the one thing I'm sad about the Tensei series at this point is, and I know it's not fair to say that it's in that situation completely, but it does feel like there is some amount of, we have to be careful on what we try.
Yeah. I think that's more just kind of an economic thing than...
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's not just being on Tensei, it's like all games, period, but like, that was specifically the reason why I fell in love with the series in the first place, was because it was doing things nobody else was doing. And so, of any franchise, like, this is the one that most bothers me in terms of it's kind of feeling like it's doing the same thing, is because this was the one franchise where I think you really had the potential to do almost anything as long as you kept the spirit and the kind of heart and soul to it.
How do you feel about the change in the fan base for the series? Like, I know we said that, like, the same conversations are going on, but how do you feel like about modern Persona 1 fans? Or
I think like, what disappoints me is that there really is the divide between the Persona and the Megaten people. Like, new era Persona is really complicated, and I really, really, really loved Persona 3 when it came out, and I think that part of what excited me about the game was it felt to me as different as Persona 1 did when that came out. And I can say now that I don't necessarily like the direction that Persona is going in at this point, in part because I was really disappointed in 5 in terms of, I think they had some real interesting chances to mix things up again, and they didn't take them. But I don't like. I still love new era Persona as much as I love old era Persona. But we have gotten into this situation where I think Megaten fans on one side kind of hate what Persona's become. They're scared of the anime influence, quote unquote. They're kind of not happy with all these supposed like bandwagon jumpers that have come in since P3. And to be fair, it does bother me when I see conversations online about like, what's your favorite Persona game? 3, 4, or 5? It's like stuff existed before those. You can't have a Persona 3, Persona 1, and 2. And that does really, really drive me. But at the same time, it's like I don't want to hate on those people because you have to come in at some point, right? And I was just lucky enough to be there when the series kind of like got its first chances in America. So I got to see it from the start, but like not everybody has done that. So if you come in through P3 or P4, or even P5, like that's cool, then I would recommend to you to then check out the other Mega 10 games and see them. But I, again, also another way do understand the frustration because you see at times those kind of new era Persona fans saying like, well, I played Shin Megami Tensei 4, but there weren't like any social links, so what's up with that? Like when they kind of bring those Persona expectations to other games, it's like you can't do that, And so I think on both sides there needs to be a little bit of calming down and saying this side is okay, this side is okay, they can coexist together. They're different things and that's fine, but in the grand scheme of things, like the stronger the entire franchise is, the better it's going to be on everybody. But it is sad sometimes because I think there's a big divide between. I think it's just getting worse and not better.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is that like my fear is that a community kind of reaches a certain point where the damage that's done is almost unfixable. Like I don't know if you're really into Fire Emblem at all, but
not much. But I know I can. Yeah. I think I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, but it's like I think the Fire Emblem fan base, just because of like the split that happened mostly because of Awakening, it can't be fixed at this point. It's almost kind of a part of the culture.
And what's funny about that too is it comes down to waifu again, right? Like,
right.
Like it's so funny that split has happened to many games once you bring in like relationships, right? I mean, because this is even like a BioWare argument. Is our BioWare games getting worse because they're allowing more relationship stuff, And it's so funny how that singular factor like either is the best thing to happen to a series or the worst thing to happen to a series, depending on your opinion.
Like, that's something that really kind of bothers me about a lot of the more hard-ass kind of Megami Tensei guys is, like, an aversion towards characters having social existences, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like, I like Devil Survivor a lot, because I think that's kind of a good blend between the, like, S&T more kind of grit to it, and, like, the Persona, we've got friends, and, like, human relationships are a thing that exists.
The middle ground.
Yeah, kind of the middle ground between the two. But it's like, sometimes the Megami Tensei people act like any effort that is made towards having human relationships and, like, friendships and camaraderie, well, that's just Persona.
Sure, but I think on the other side of that, too, though, is the problem that if you are kind of more on the Megaten side, like, it is easy to feel like that kind of, I don't want to say the word gritty, but like that kind of dark, gothic, a little bit more serious and mature attitude, like is getting watered down some, either watered down some or just you're getting less examples. I think there's a certain point where, even if you look at like a Soul Hackers, for example, like it has some of those more personality focused characters, but there was still that same kind of underlying atmosphere. And I actually do really like the Devil Survivor games, both of them. But I think if you are somebody of that side, you can say, yeah, but look how like anime it is, like where is the kind of Mega 10 flair that I fell in love with in the first place? And so I think what bothers me is that I wish there was a little bit more of a balance in terms of getting at least a few more examples of that kind of more classic Megami Tensei gameplay and style and stuff. Like I'm not gonna hate on Persona getting like dancing games and the Q games and stuff, because I do enjoy those, but at the same time it's like I do kind of want a few more, more old school kind of games, and like I wish we could see some more of that. And so I think if there was a little bit better of a balance between what we were getting, like if you knew like every other game, right? Like, okay, this is gonna be hardcore old school Mega 10. The next game is kind of more new era, more lighthearted, character development kind of stuff, and then you go back and forth. Like, I would appreciate that so that you at least knew what was coming. Because I think at times right now, it can feel like, even though this is the strongest point for the series in terms of getting it in the West and stuff, is that it can feel like we have to beg more and more for these kind of games.
Yeah.
And we have to hope for them more and wait for them more. And so when a new one's announced and it's Persona, you're kind of like, oh my god, like I kind of wish that was something different.
Speaking of like getting stuff here in the West, what were your thoughts when we just never got Innocent Sin in like the PS1 era?
So I have actually talked to some people behind the scenes on that, and I'm not saying this as gospel, but my understanding of what happened was it was literally one of those cases of Japanese developer losing code. Or screwing up code, or something about the code where all of a sudden it got far more complicated to bring it over to us. I'm sorry. You asked about Innocent Sin. I'm jumping ahead. I'm jumping ahead to PSP era. Sorry. Innocent Sin. I at that point it was more I'm glad we're getting something, because as I was saying on the Persona site, it's like I hope we get Devil Summoner. And there was this little bit of like excitement for what might come that was followed by like kind of crushing reality of all of a sudden, like, this kind of hope seems to be getting dashed because maybe we're not getting these games after all. So at that point, when it came to Innocent Sin, it was a case of, I'm kind of glad we got Eternal Punishment at all, And then when I played it and didn't like it, I kind of almost didn't care that Innocent Sin didn't come. Which I feel it's stupid for now, because I love those games. But like at that point, like I wasn't really Megami Tensei. I was Persona, And since Persona had been let me down, like I didn't care as much yet. It would take a little while still before my the difference between knowing the series and actually really loving it. And so I wasn't really in love with it yet. So I wasn't as sad as I would be later than when the opposite happened.
So you said something that almost interests me more in a way. It's the PSP version of Eternal Punishment that you were talking about, right?
Yes, which my understanding is it was an issue with the code where that something got screwed up or something got lost or something where it was going to be just too big of a hassle to bring it over, and they didn't think it was worth it. Which that really pissed me off. Like that, of all the things we've kind of missed out on, I think the worst one for me. Because you kind of had this feeling of like the PSP being this Persona archive system for a while there, because we had the Persona remake, and then the Innocent Sin came out finally over here for the first time, and then we had Persona 3 Portable, and so it was like, just give me Eternal Punishment as well, and this kind of whole collection is complete. But then all of a sudden, to have that complete collection, we have to bring in one of the PS1 games, and so that was really, really disappointing. It's like that's the one I think, of anything, if I could go back in time and grant us one release, I would give us that.
What's in hindsight, what do you think of Revelations Persona's localization and changes? Snow Queen Quest aside.
I mean, Mark, right? Like Mark. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you not laugh about Mark? Like, what possible place do you come from where you think Mark is a logical decision to make? Because I mean, like, then great, you've added one black person to this entire city of the rest of the characters that aren't changed. And then you have like, okay, main character now is a redhead instead of having dark hair.
Right, as if the main character looked like he would be really weird and out of place in the United States. Right.
Like, it just seems like so, I mean, I think if anything, if I was going localizing that game and I'm scared of how it's going to be accepted, right? I tone down some of the demonic stuff. Like I go after other things. This kind of felt like, look, we've got like 2 days to make changes. What can we change that will make it different at all? And it was just like, it just seemed like the most nonsensical kind of decisions to be made, period. And it's so funny in contrast. Yeah. And it's so funny in contrast to go ahead to Persona 3, where you go so far on the other end that you have like, San and Chan being used like that. But yeah, it's just it's crazy that like that made any kind of sense to Alice at the time.
What was it like living in a pre-Final Fantasy VII world?
Because Final Fantasy VII is brought up so many times in that website, it's kind of uncanny. It's the amount of people that were excited.
If you didn't live in that time, you can't understand what it meant. Like, there literally is, in terms of RPGs in the West, there is pre-Final Fantasy and post-Final Fantasy. Like, it really was that life-changing. Because, when we talk about, like, Persona coming over, like, that was just a completely random thing. That was not guaranteed. There was no expectation of that. It's like, oh, cool, Persona, There were certainly games that were trying to be big, and it was funny to me that you guys had no clue what Beyond the Beyond was, because that was a game Sony was really pushing to be their next big RPG franchise at the time. And we see where that's at, right? Like, you guys, none of you had any idea
never heard of it.
Yeah. So, so when Final Fantasy VII hit, I think one of the first things that was so weird to me was there was actually like television commercials. And that was unheard of in terms of RPGs in America. And it was it really legitimately felt different, even like leading up to the game's release. And when it came out, it was almost like an overnight change in that before Final Fantasy VII, RPGs were a thing that either companies specialized in, so they released them, or somebody just happened to decide to take a chance on in terms of localizing it. Like, that was the kind of attitude. And then when Final Fantasy VII hit, it hit so big, so quickly, that RPGs became an established genre in the West. They were an expectation now. These are real games that people want. Like, it almost felt like most companies didn't think anybody actually wanted to play RPGs.
Until Final Fantasy VII.
Until Final Fantasy VII. And then like, it's very similar to like before Street Fighter 2, there were a scattering of small fighting games. But as soon as Street Fighter 2 hits, fighting games are a genre. Fighting games are a thing. Fighting games are something that every company is going to try to make going forward. And so the same kind of thing with RPGs at that point is that Final Fantasy VII just opened so many eyes, both in terms of companies and in terms of the fan base. But I mean, to get really crazy, like if we go back more than that, I remember when there weren't RPGs, period. Yeah. Like, I remember RPGs, like the first RPGs on consoles, like coming out and being new on shelves and not knowing what they were.
Do you have any examples of titles?
The first ones that came out that I played were like Phantasy Star and Miracle Warriors on the Master System, and then Dragon Warrior, which was of course Dragon Quest, and then the first Final Fantasy. Like, I played all those four of those games when they first came out, and there were RPGs on the computers before that, but if you were a console focused player, like those were legitimately the first RPGs to exist in the West. And it was funny getting Phantasy Star and getting Dragon Warrior and like not understanding at first what an RPG, like how it played, and like being introduced to some of those ideas, like turn-based battles and like overworld maps. Like, I mean, so it's crazy to me that I can actually remember, like I was very young, but I can remember like RPGs not existing, period. And then you go forward many years, and then Final Fantasy VII hits, and then that changes like RPGs again. And in terms of now they're a legitimate thing, and we're going to start getting a whole lot more of them.
Is there anything you would bring back from the earlier Persona games, seemingly mainly Persona 1? Would you want them to go back to that?
I would say Persona 2, like I would like a little bit older characters. Like, I think, I mentioned like Persona 5, like I think part of my disappointment with P5 was, we get Catherine, and Catherine we're told is this kind of like testing ground for some of the ideas they're going to be using. And I loved Catherine in terms of the cast and kind of their dynamic. And that really, really, really hit home with me in terms of, I would love to see this next game like not be high school focused. Like, make the characters a little bit older, give them a completely different perspective on life and set of problems and everything, and then see where that can go. So I kind of think that the one thing I would absolutely bring back would actually be from P2, and that would be, give us a chance to see characters that can be skewed a little. I mean, maybe even go older than that. Like college level, or even like a little bit past that. Like, I think there's a lot of interesting situations you can do with Persona instead of just keeping making it like high school.
So yeah, I guess our last question for you here is, what do you think about the modern Persona 1 and 2 fan base, and are you upset by the lack of representation for those games?
I think the thing that like makes me most upset is when, I don't know if it's a fan base, but I think kind of there's this attitude out there that Persona 1 is unplayable. And that it's just not worth going back to. And I think Persona 1 still has just an immense amount of value to it. But at the same time, I understand, I understand why it's hard to go back to. And I understand why, especially if you come in the new era, like, that you can't play those games. It's tough. Like, it is really tough. And it's kind of unfriendly at times. And it's very cryptic in terms of what you're supposed to be doing or the systems and whatever, and it can be slow and it can be plotting, but I love those games, and I'm so sad that there is this attitude in the current era that like P2 is still a game to go back to. Like, people will say that, oh yeah, you can still go back to either version of P2, each one for different reasons and stuff, but like, even as much as people will argue that Persona 1 and 2 are kind of thrown away a lot of times or forgotten, like, I think when they're not, then P2 is remembered, but P1 is thrown away, and I kind of wish there was more appreciation for what it was and what it can still be. And I know that, I'm lucky that I was there when it came out, so I got to see it as a brand new game and got that kind of perspective on it. But even if you can't have that perspective, I wish people would be able to go back to it and appreciate it for what it was and what it still can be. Because I think of any RPG for me that I can go back to, like, that's one of the top. And I know I'm biased towards it, just I loved it so much, but I think it still has a place in this world that tends to be forgotten and only given to Persona 2, talking about the kind of P3, the pre-P3 era.
And are you upset about the way that Atlus seemingly treats those games? Like, they really don't seem too interested in having like a Persona 1 and 2 like big revival kind of thing.
I'm holding my breath right now for the Persona 1 dancing game. It's of course coming. Yeah, I think, I don't know if part of it is even just that, like, there's this attitude that the characters are just too different and from different kind of like concepts and gameplay atmospheres and stuff, but I do kind of wish Atlus gave it respect. I mean, I'm honestly shocked that we got the PSP remakes, period. So I'm very glad about that, but it's tough because just, when P3 hit and everything past that, like, it feels just so different in so many ways that it almost feels like two different franchises, And so I can't completely blame them because they are just so different things. Like on Final Fantasy, it's very different because you expect every game to be something completely changed from the previous game. But like with Persona, it feels like two very different kind of halves to one complete whole that maybe don't always go together. So I think it's hard. Like, I wish they would give it more attention and like credit in this era. And I can also understand why, because it does feel like P1 and 2 are just, a universe apart from what we have now.
All right. Guess that's about it. Mollie, thank you so much for joining us. It's a lot of fun.
I didn't get like the waifu question. I'm so shocked.
Right. We got to ask you. Who's your waifu?
Here on has your
waifu changed at all since then?
So I mean, so I guess, like, let me ask you a question. Like, P3, P4, and P5, like, for the three of you, like, which is the best game in terms of waifu? Like which ones have the best options?
I'd say 3. They lined up with a lot of my taste personally, because I'm a macabre, sad person.
I like Naoto from Persona 4 most of all, but I think
Mm-hmm.
Persona 5 really nailed having something for everyone.
As for me, I think Persona 3 has the best, like, good waifu to capita ratio, but Persona 5 has a lot of good ones, too.
See, it's so funny to like to hear those choices because like for me P3 like my waifu choice in that one was Yuko.
Yuko's
So
a
I
good
didn't-
choice.
Because I hated Yukari.
Nice.
I wasn't really into Mitsuru as like a, and then I actually liked Fuka, but I know everybody else hates her.
Oh, you got great taste.
The pat okay.
What
Yeah.
about Chihiro?
I have my hatred of Fuka comes more from the fact that I love to cook and that she physically hurt me doing that social link.
I am kind of like I wish they would get past the klutzy girls who can't cook kind of idea.
Luckily,
did.
there
That-
wasn't any of that in Persona 5, really.
Yeah. P4,
Well,
my
actually,
first playthrough was Rise. I think she was my top choice, and then when I went to Golden, I picked Yukiko, but I kind of like feel like Yukiko and Chie are a thing, so I can't.
Yeah.
I actually think P5 is my favorite in terms of choices because it was the game where I had a really tough choice. Because my top was if I was going to go team wise, I had to go. I mean, there is no choice above Makoto.
Oh, Mollie, you are so wise. You have such wisdom.
But then, oh my god, I'm totally gonna forget her name. The teacher,
Kawakami.
Yeah.
Kawakami.
Your
Yeah,
taste hasn't changed since back
it
then.
has it. It has it. Like, I have the teacher thing. What can I say? So like, I actually it's funny because I actually went and on a personal blog I run, like I went through and did because it was so funny to me that in Persona 3 Port that like all of a sudden every teacher in the game gets this really hot looking artwork. Like they put like effort into giving all like characters. She did the whole post about like how P3 teachers got hot all of a sudden. So yeah, Kawakami was like my on the, but like Makoto was my choice, I think.
Nice.
So P5 was like I think far and away the best in terms of like actual choice.
The more things change.
The more-
I love how all roads when you're talking about Persona eventually just lead to waifus. I think I hold the genuine belief that there is something just in the genetic structure of people that like these games that make them inclined towards these kinds of conversations.
But you know, I mean, I think like there's an interesting conversation to have about does a game like Persona naturally like push for that anyway? Because you know we don't have a selectable character, right? I can't be a female character in the games except for P3P, and then you know P2 with Maya. But like, so I think you're stuck being a guy anyway, right? And you know it's going to give you like female choices. And I think the Persona games are just naturally you're put in a situation where you're always kind of to the situation. Like even in Persona 5, while it's the big city of Tokyo and you're just kind of moving to parts of Tokyo, you're still going somewhere you're not used to. You're going to a new school you're not used to. You're getting these new powers you're not used to. You're getting having on adventures you're not used to. So there's all these things that kind of like make you feel like alone in the world in the game. So I think it's almost this kind of natural emotional push that you want somebody to be there for you. You know, you want like to know that, you know, in the nighttime, like if when you're tired from going through dungeons and you know you're feeling worn out and everything, there's some cute girl waiting. Like I mean, I literally think that that's just a kind of, if you're putting yourself in the mindset of the male protagonist, like that's kind of the natural progression of how you would think, is that you want somebody to be there for you. And I'm curious to know if you guys felt the same thing. Like I really felt in P5 like the game wanted you to date Makoto. Because it just felt to me like it was setting her up as kind of the co-lead with your character. And so it was really interesting, and like I felt good because that was my choice anyway, but it even felt to the point where like P5 is acknowledging that like you need somebody to kind of back you up sometimes and support you when things are looking grim. So it almost felt to me like not only was the waifu aspect there, but they were even trying to push you towards one certain choice to say that you did need that certain person there for.
See, that statement is going to be very controversial because there's both, like, an extremely diehard, avid Makoto is the canon faction, and then there's the people who want nothing more than the annihilation of all people who like Makoto.
And I mean, look, I can understand not liking Makoto, but I find it impossible to argue that the game doesn't try to make her canon. Like, more so than P3 or P4, I swear that, like, that game puts her in situations so that you're like, she seems like the obvious choice.
And what I have here is more of a personal request. Do you mind plugging some of your stuff? Because I actually am kind of curious where else we can find you.
Sure. So I currently work for EGM, which is egmnow.com. And EGM was one of the earliest video game magazines in America to exist. And the magazine isn't around anymore, but we write where I do a bunch of reviews for games, and I've not all for EGM, but I think I have reviewed like every Persona game since 3 and a bunch of other Mega 10 games. So there's myself on there. I'm on Twitter as MolliePen, MOLLIPEN. And if you go there, then you can go to my personal website where I have up like some of my older writing. Like, I'm still putting that website together, but there is like a bunch of my writing up on stuff. And for example, this isn't plugging, but I did a cover story when Persona 4 was coming out, like the cover for that, and we were actually the last magazine in America to feature a PS2 game on the cover. And so when I did that, I got to interview Meguro and Soejima and so it was the director, the artist, and the musician, and I'm forgetting a name. So I got to interview all three of them, and so some of that interview site, I'm putting the rest up soon, and then my cover story is up on there, so you can see kind of like some history of Mega 10 coverage I've done. And then I've also done like various podcasts and stuff, so you can get links.
Mollie, thank you so much for joining us. I told you a little bit about this before we started, but this is in fact the last video that we're going to be doing on the channel.
So either people are going to enjoy it as like your...
Oh no, this is the best conclusion we could ask.
No, I genuinely think this is probably the best way we could possibly go out.
So it was really funny to me, like not only seeing like you're watching your video and like hearing your guys' reactions and then also, because I mean, I guess real quick, so what had happened was, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, is I'm looking at my Twitter like mentions, and then a friend says, you know, like, yeah, Mollie, don't take it down. And I don't know what he's talking about. And so I click through to read the whole thread, and that's where like RPG Site has like, please don't let these Persona fan sites ever go down. A picture of my site. And I'm like, how in the hell did they find that? Like why are they posting about it? And then I get people talking to me about it, and then I found out you guys did a video. So I go look at your video and then like seeing the comments, and it's been so interesting, like all the different comments coming from people about this and stuff. And also too, what was funny to me was there was almost like this kind of, oh, it's a shame this Persona, the person who made the site is like dead and gone now, and they never saw like current era, you know. It was just
little did we know.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm still here and alive and still playing Persona.
You've interviewed like Soejima and Meguro.
Yeah, you
like
are. Last little thank you for me for validating my tastes in Megami Tensei.
And thank you for me for helping me find the Snow Queen quest. That's actually how I found your site in the first place.
that was really funny, yeah. But yeah, it's a shame. Like I said, I'm curious now. I'll have to go back and actually try to see, because I still have my old memory card with the saves on it. Is like, I wonder if you can get to it in the retail version, because I think you might be able to, even though it's not like properly translated.
From what I've never tried to do this, but from what I've heard, most of the files like associated with it are in there, but when you force yourself to go there, it's just in this horribly corrupt, like not functional state.
Yeah, because I know it's in a debug, so I'll have to check and see.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I think this was a great last video.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Like I said,
Yeah,
it
no problem.
was exciting to see you guys talking about the site, and so it's been fun to actually speak on it.
Bye.